The mind of the rising generation has always been in the front headlights for American politicians. And that's the thing about erasing the past. If you erase it, then you can do some stuff today and tell people it's brand new. There are people who are literally freaking out in this country about the fact that our young generation is going to learn the truth about our history. Think about that for a minute. How afraid do you have to be to go into a school board meeting and scream at teachers, "Don't teach my fourth grader critical race theory," which is a law school curriculum. It would be like going in and saying, "Don't teach my fourth grader applied nuclear physics." And it's like, well, that's not what's going on, but that shows you how afraid people are of the truth.
Hello guys, welcome once again to AfriPost. I hope wherever you are, you're having a great time. Now, many times we have always talked about the challenges that black people have gone through in the United States. And when it comes to historical depiction of the challenges and the discrimination that blacks have gone through, sometimes you look at what blacks achieved and they are not really being noted down in historical books that are used in schools in America. Why is it that it seems that the American history has been whitewashed, especially when it comes to the atrocities committed by whites towards black people? In today's video, we are going to listen to this lawyer, Jeffrey Robinson, speaking about the phenomenon of how white history or history in America has been whitewashed. I want us to listen to how he really tells this out, and then we shall come back in the end to share our thoughts. Let's watch.
I will say about America's history, people are afraid because part of what the truth requires folks to do is to realize that our origin story is a myth. And when you're asking a group of people to give up their origin story or to modify their origin story, that is a huge ask. And there is all kinds of both intellectual and emotional reasons why people are reluctant to do that. But the truth about our history is clear and undeniable if you're willing to just look. And I think a lot of times people have a problem. People want to say either America is great or it's racist. And my response is America is one of the greatest countries on the face of the earth. And it's also one of the most racist countries on the face of the earth. And those two things have coexisted for a long time. But in the end, one will trump the other. Greatness and racism cannot coexist forever. And we are coming to a point in this country where we're going to have to choose which one we're going to go for. And so I think there is a fear because people think, oh my God, if I acknowledge that these bad things have happened, that means I may have to do something about it. It means I may have to make different decisions than I've made before. It means I may have to acknowledge that there are people who are living at economic levels far beneath where I'm living, and yet they have every bit as much talent, work ethic, and everything else. And so that's a fearful thing to acknowledge, but I think we're coming to the point where we're not going to have a choice. I will give you an example of critical race theory. It is a historical fact that white people own homes at a much higher rate than black people. That's a historical fact. What critical race theory will say is, well, there may be reasons for that. For example, the entire history of redlining by the Federal Housing Administration. For example, the fact that between 1934 and 1962, the Federal Housing Administration gave 98% of its home loan money to white Americans. So critical race theory explains how racism has had an impact on historical events in our country. But history has a very simple definition. If you're talking about people in the past, and you're talking about what they did, what they said, and what they said about what they did, that's history. It's nothing else. And if you look, there are 44 states since January of 2021 that have enacted or started to study some kind of legislation to restrict what can be taught to our children. And so this is why I continue to say, this is nothing new. This is an old strategy. And it goes all the way back to 1837 and John C. Calhoun, one of the most virulent racists in American history. He was vice president twice. And what he said, 25 years before the start of the Civil War, we got to stop teaching abolition. We got to get it out of the schools, and we got to get it out of the pulpits on Sunday, because if we don't, the minds of the rising generation are going to reject slavery, and slavery is going to be done for, and we will have a war that will drench this country in blood. He said that a quarter century before the Civil War, and he was absolutely right. The mind of the rising generation has always been in the front headlights for American politicians. And that's the thing about erasing the past. If you erase it, then you can do some stuff today and tell people it's brand new. There are people who are literally freaking out in this country about the fact that our young generation is going to learn the truth about our history. Think about that for a minute. How afraid do you have to be to go into a school board meeting and scream at teachers, "Don't teach my fourth grader critical race theory," which is a law school curriculum? It would be like going in and saying, "Don't teach my fourth grader applied nuclear physics." And it's like, well, that's not what's going on, but that shows you how afraid people are of the truth. You mentioned before about elections, not just being the federal election. School boards are elected, folks. Mayors and city council people are elected.
Well,
and so if you want an impact on who's making those decisions, you got to vote for somebody in those elections. Go ahead.
just to that note, the current state government is seeking to take over the Houston Independent School District.
And so how much more of an indication do you need of the power of the truth? And so we're talking about community and how you build community. If you are going to have discussions about the history of anti-Black racism in America, you need to be armed. And I'm not talking about with weapons. I'm talking about with facts. So if you look at the documentary we did a couple of years ago, the beginning of that film, I have a discussion with a gentleman from Charleston, South Carolina, and he is standing in front of 3 huge Confederate flags. And he's talking about how the Confederate flag has nothing to do with racism. But when he started telling me, we didn't go to war over slavery, it was about moral tariffs. Moral is a man's name. And I said, yeah, cotton, tobacco, and rice. And all of a sudden he's looking at me like, oh, you know that. And I think what people were looking for, think about it like this: a white man and a black man screaming at each other about racism. How boring is that? How often do you see that? But what happened here is that I was talking to him in this tone of voice. And we got to the point of him saying, when he was seeing that all of his statements were being contradicted by fact, he went to the only place he had left. Well, they stayed because they chose to, because we treated them like family. And my response to that was, then would it be okay if I own you, as long as I treat you like family? And he started thinking, you could see the wheels turning, and he said, in today's world, and my response, in any world, in today's time, in any time. He ended up saying no. Did we change his mind? No, I don't think so, because he's continued to post racist stuff on the internet. But this man has been in contact with the Who We Are Project numerous times. And he's saying, I think I look like a racist in that movie, and that's bothering me. His mind hasn't been changed, but he has had a naked lunch moment. Naked Lunch, the book written by William Burroughs, the American author. And Burroughs said a naked lunch moment is that moment when you have to look at what's on the end of every fork. And he had a naked lunch moment with racism in America. And if we can have discussions, my friend Tom Hanks is always saying dispassionate discussions. If we can have discussions where when people want to yell at us and throw racist stuff at us, if we can simply listen to that and then come back with facts and demonstrate, here are the 15 ways what you said is complete bullshit, and do it in a tone of voice like this. This is one way that you can build community. I'll tell you really quickly. A person in the military, a JAG officer from the Marines, saw our film. And he came to me and he said, I want to thank you for talking to that guy from South Carolina the way you did. Because that man is every male in my family. And when I show my family this movie, they're going to see that you spoke to him, you called him sir, you even shook his hand at the end of it. So are we going to get everybody by having discussions about the truth? No, we won't. But if history tells you anything, you don't need everybody to make radical change in a country. You need a small number of dedicated people. And I think the Who We Are Project, the other two people that you see on this stage, we are small parts of a major conversation that's going on in America. And I will end by saying this. I feel bad for the politicians in the state of Texas trying to suppress this stuff. I really do. If any of you have a teenager, the quickest way to get a teenager to read something is to tell them they can't. And I've also understood that there's this thing called the internet out there. So that if you think the classroom is the only place children can learn, you're wrong. The Who We Are Project is going to Florida this year for an event we call a Day of Learning. We will have national experts, state of Florida experts, and city of Jacksonville experts on anti-black racism. We will send cars and buses, if necessary, into black communities so that people who can't get there downtown, who can't afford to get there, they'll have transportation down and back. We will feed everyone that comes by working with black-owned restaurants. We have an agreement with one of the largest teachers unions in America, 1 million copies of banned books that they have. We will send every young person home with their own bag of banned books to read, and we will invite Governor DeSantis and all of the Republican legislators. They won't come. Of course they won't come. But we will make it clear to everybody in Florida, come listen to what we're saying and understand this ain't critical race theory. This is the truth about our history. And those are the ways that you build community, with people hearing that, understanding it, and then coming to say, you know, what can I do to help this along? It's always possible to make people in power change their mind. That's why it's called a democracy. And if it's not power, if you can't change the mind of an individual, then one thing that you have the ability to do is to vote that individual out. I think we heard before the importance of people understanding that the right to vote is so powerful. And that's why there's so many attempts to restrict it. And so I think democracy is undergoing a challenge in America, and we are going to find out just who we are as a country in the next 10 to 15 years. Make no mistake about it. So if you have any question about whether you should be getting engaged on these issues, I would ask you to think very carefully. Go home and tell your children and your grandchildren, these are difficult discussions. makes me really uncomfortable. I don't have to engage in this because it doesn't impact me. So I'm not going to do anything about it, and I'm going to leave to you and your generation problems that are even worse. If you think about whether I should be involved, go home and look at your children, and I think you'll get an answer that's pretty clear. I'm trying to take hope from the actions of people who want America to either go back or stay in the status quo, because they are desperate. They see change coming, and it scares the hell out of them. And two things that I think are really important. You just heard that the vagrancy laws that people are talking about today, literally word for word, the kind of laws that were passed at the end of slavery. When you erase the past, you can do shit and tell people it's new, and they'll have no idea. That's the power of erasing the past, is that people don't understand we've seen this before and we know what it is. And finally, I would say that it's important to understand that action causes hope. Hope does not cause action. If you are looking for hope, I'd advise you to look in the first place that I look when I get up, and that's in the mirror. Because if your actions are pushing toward an America where freedom and democracy is truly something for everybody, then I guarantee you, not only will you have hope, but people around you will have hope.
Wow, what a great lecture there. Jeffrey Robinson, as prominent civil rights lawyer and former deputy legal director at the ACLU, has become one of the most compelling voices challenging the whitewashing of American history. In his lectures and speeches, notably his powerful presentation, Who We Are, A Choice of Racism in America, Robinson asserts that American history has been deliberately sanitized to protect a national identity rooted in white supremacy. He explains that the erasure and distortion of facts, such as the realities of slavery, indigenous genocide, and systemic racism, have been central to maintaining myths of American exceptionalism. This whitewashing has allowed generations to grow up unaware of the full scope of racial injustice embedded in the country's foundation. Robinson emphasizes that education has played a crucial role in the distortion. In his speeches, he frequently cites how textbooks used across the U.S. minimize the brutality of slavery or depict Confederate figures as noble heroes rather than traitors defending human bondage. For instance, he notes that students often learn about the founding fathers without critical acknowledgement of their role in perpetuating slavery. This selective narrative not only misinforms students but also sustains structural racism by denying its roots. Robinson contends that failing to confront the truth about history enables racial inequalities to persist under a veil of national pride and ignorance. Another key point Robinson makes is the deliberate political effort to control historical narratives. He draws attention to the backlash against the teaching of critical race theory and anti-racism curricula, interpreting it as a part of a broader attempt to suppress uncomfortable truths. In his speeches, he explains that historical whitewashing is not merely passive forgetfulness, but a strategic move to uphold a power structure that benefits from racial hierarchies. He discusses how lawmakers, school boards, and political groups have worked to ban or limit truthful discussions of race, thereby keeping the public misinformed and resistant to systemic change. Robinson also explores the psychological and cultural consequences of whitewashed history. He argues that when Americans are taught a version of history that omits the atrocities committed against black people, indigenous communities, and other minorities, it fosters a sense of denial and entitlement among white Americans. At the same time, it marginalizes and alienates people of color whose histories are minimized or ignored. Through this dynamic, whitewashing history becomes not only an act of omission, but a tool of oppression that affects how people understand justice, citizenship, and national identity. Ultimately, Jeffrey Robinson insists that confronting and correcting the whitewashing of history is essential for genuine racial reconciliation. He urges audiences to learn the true history of America, not out of guilt, but out of a desire for honesty and progress. Through his work, he champions a more inclusive and accurate historical narrative, one that acknowledges the full complexity of American past and the enduring impact of racism. By doing so, Robinson believes Americans can begin to dismantle the structures that have long marginalized communities of color and build a more equitable society rooted in truth. You can share your thoughts down in the comment section, and if you're watching us for the first time, consider subscribing to the channel, like the video, and share. Thank you, and let's meet in the next one.